Hey, you guys, and welcome to It's a Beautiful Mess. This is the podcast where we tackle tough conversations to rebuild marriages and inspire newlyweds through godly principles. Hey, honey, how are you doing?
I am wonderful, excited for episode 2, season 2. Let's do it. Let's go.
Yes, I'm excited as well. So let's go ahead and get into it, shall we?
Let's do
All
it.
right, we have a lot to cover, you guys. Sorry, no small talk. We don't want to hold you up too long, but we do have quite a bit we want to share today.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're talking about foundations of love, or should I say, we're continuing
Yes.
foundations of love.
Continuation.
Yes. So, if you've been tuning in, then you already know our very first episode for this season was Foundations of Love.
Mm-hmm.
We kicked it off with what? Love and respect and selfless
Yep, that
sacrifice.
is correct.
Yeah. So we want to do a part two because there's so much to unpack that we couldn't fit it all into one episode.
Yeah, and we wanted to make sure we're mindful of your time when you're listening. We try to make our episodes short, but not too short, short and sweet and to the point. So here's our part 2.
Yeah. So, the topic or the pieces of the foundations of love that we want to address, or elements of the foundations of love that we want to discuss, is going to be forgiveness, grace, communication, and unity.
Nice.
Okay. So, I thought it was fitting for me to kick off this episode because, as many of you know from last season, or even just from the last
Yeah,
episode,
yeah.
I've expressed how I've struggled with many, if not all, of these areas of love that I just mentioned. So I'll tackle forgiveness and grace first.
Okay, let's do
Okay.
it.
All right. So we've spoken in the past about showing each other grace to an extent, but we didn't really dive into what it looks like to be gracious.
Mm-hmm.
And in my experience, I believe it's quite literally one of the hardest spiritual fights between the flesh and spirit. At least it is, I could say, in marriage, because everything in the flesh says your spouse
Mm.
deserves your wrath,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, you guys, I know you're with me. You feel me on this, because they should know better
Yeah.
for one reason or another. And while God's word says bear with each other
Mm-hmm.
and forgive, the flesh is saying, no, no,
No, no,
no.
no. Well, let's let them have it. They
Okay,
deserve
I
it.
think it's time for you to get this work.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps we lack grace with our spouses more than strangers because he or she is the one person we don't have to pretend with, or maybe it's because there's no risk of loss, like a job, where you have to show up and you have to present a certain representative of yourself, or
Yeah.
there's no loss of money.
Yeah, like you're with me to the long haul. Like we live together, we stay together. Maybe it's the point that I don't have to really impress, you, or I shouldn't. I don't have to be mindful of certain things sometimes because you're with me and we are one. So maybe
Isn't that
that,
interesting?
yeah, maybe that oneness of, oh, okay, I can walk around the house. It's the same example of walking around the house, with your hair not done, or not wearing makeup if you ever
Mm-hmm.
want to, wear makeup anytime you go out, or it's a must that you have to wear makeup. It's just one of those things where, we're together and we are
Mm-hmm.
one. So it's, we kind of fall short sometimes of those
and
important things.
and you said a mouthful there, like, you guys, there's so much I want to say about what he just said,
Mm-hmm.
but to keep us on track, I'm just going to say I feel like what he just shared is so true,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so dangerous
Yeah.
all at the same time, because we do let our guards down.
Mm-hmm.
We let them down spiritually
Yep.
as well. And that's, and I said this last season, that when we're together, our marriage is one of the most important places where our guards should always be up,
Exactly.
because it's a union that God has created, so it's always under attack.
Exactly.
But anyway, I will we'll I'll get into that more.
Hmm.
But if I could finish my thought here, maybe to my husband's point, maybe there's no reputational risk involved either. And like he said, no need to impress anyone.
Hmm.
But I would venture to say that that is the most incorrect thinking
Hmm.
that we could ever have. Now, me personally, looking back in my marriage, I was risking God's reputation because my husband knew me to be a Christian.
Hmm.
So I could have caused his faith to fail.
Hmm.
I could have and did lose him.
Yeah.
And while I didn't need to impress him, the impression that I left on him
Wow.
affected him psychologically,
Wow.
which impacted him spiritually, mentally, and emotionally.
Hmm.
So it is much more dangerous for us to let our guard down, quote, and I'm doing air quotes, you guys, you can't see me, but quote unquote, let our guard down, right? Or let our hair down, or take the wig off, or
Wow.
lay my cross down, whatever it is that we say
Uh-huh.
to express that, I'm letting everything hang
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
We shouldn't. We should absolutely be on guard. So, to let me get back to myself. So, I was not gracious toward Stefan.
Okay.
I would say I was disgraceful
Mm.
to my husband, and that's a very strong word, but that's how I feel. I feel like I didn't give him grace. I was more disgraceful toward him. Um, which didn't honor God or my husband. And guys, Paul reminds us in Colossians chapter 3 of the posture that we should take toward others when they have wronged us, which was to be careful that we make allowances for each other's faults and mistakes.
Yes.
And that's something that I did not do. I was looking for perfection out of him. And I'm looking for something out of him because something was missing in me.
Hmm.
Okay. But for some reason, you guys, marriage is the one place that we neglect to raise the standard of holiness, which was what I was going to say before. I didn't want to steal my thunder.
Hmm.
I didn't want to steal my own thunder, but Stefan brought up some really good points
Hmm.
about how, we don't get dolled up or dressed up when we're at home because it's where we're comfortable, which is great.
Yeah.
But liking it to how
Hmm.
we treat our spouse, you know, we got to raise the standard of
Yeah.
holiness when it comes to our marriage. Because God created this union, and I've said that already, but I'm going to continue to say it. We easily allow anger to control our words and actions,
Hmm.
thinking we're justified in doing so. But we are absolutely not justified in behaving that way. Only because truly, our anger, you guys, is usually tied to something that's unholy.
Hmm.
God can use his anger, God's wrath or his anger is always from a place of holiness.
Hmm.
And it's directed at sin with intense opposition.
Yeah.
And he does it all without sinning, which is something we tend to miss. We
Yes.
miss the can't sin when we get angry part.
Hmm.
And since we have all sinned and come short of the glory of God, we would be careful, or we should be careful, to give each other grace and depend solely on God as we experience anger. And I'm not saying we can't be angry, which is what, which is what I'm trying to say, just depend on God when you feel angry.
Can I add something really
Yeah,
quick?
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think you mentioned this when you talked about Colossians, and how Paul reminds us, that we should, how we should, um, how we should view the faults of others.
Mm-hmm.
What I want our listeners to just remember, and normally I have these thoughts in my mind, and I don't want to, because I can go down a rabbit hole with a lot of things, so I have to shut up sometimes. But what I want our listeners to be reminded of is that when the Bible talks about neighbor or talks about any other person, it's still talking about the marriage and how we should treat others,
That's
your
good.
brothers. Yes, because a lot of times, if we don't see the, I guess, the communication or the reference to when it comes to wife and husband, we just think, oh, I'm gonna make sure I treat those outside of my home a certain way.
Mm,
But the scripture's also talking about your
your
spouse.
spouse.
So I just wanted to
Yes.
bring that to everyone's attention, and be mindful of that.
That's good. Your neighbor is also your spouse. Hello.
Exactly.
So that's good, baby. Thanks for
Mm-hmm.
adding that.
Yeah.
So if you're not sure if you're showing your spouse grace, examine yourself against these scenarios. So I'm going to give you about four, and you can jot them down if you like, but here we go. Do you take every opportunity to remind them of their faults?
Mm.
Next one, are you critical of them in some way? And anytime you get a chance, you express that criticism
Mm-hmm.
and you do it with enthusiasm. Like you are excited about it. Like you
Yes.
are such a
Let
loser,
me tell you about yourself today.
right?
Now is the time.
Yes, you are always doing this. You are a loser in this
And I
area,
got proof to show you. Look,
right?
right here.
Exactly. You did this just
You're
yesterday.
just too excited about it.
So, next one. Do
Mm.
you assume the worst about them before giving them the benefit of the doubt?
Ooh.
Right?
Yeah, that's a tough one there.
It is. It is because we experience each other all the time,
Exactly. And
right?
yeah. And it's like, yeah, I know this is his trend. This is gonna
Mm-hmm.
happen. But and I'll say that I'm on the I guess the giving in on that, because
Mm-hmm.
I have certain habits or trends that
So
that
do
take
I.
place with me, but then too, I have my moments where it's like I'm on point. It's like, hey, I got it together.
Okay.
So
Don't
just
pigeonhole me. I
yeah,
got this
I
this
got
time.
this. You know what I'm saying?
I
And
may
it's
have
not to
messed up
prove
last
you
time.
wrong. It's just to help me to better myself,
Yeah.
because I see how it affects you. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. And my last note that I want you to consider, do you consider your spouse's feelings before saying something that might tear them down?
Mm, okay.
If so, if your answer is yes to any of those, these are examples of someone not offering grace.
Got it.
So it is likely that you are not being gracious to your spouse. So after all of this, if it's still unclear to you what grace is, the best explanation I've heard is this: grace is treating someone well,
Mm,
even when they don't deserve it.
okay.
So, unlike respect, grace is not earned or requested. Ephesians chapter 2 says grace is a gift from God and we've been created for his good works. Now, while my husband and I, support the idea that communication is vital in marriage, you guys, grace is not up for debate
No.
or discussion. Like this, instead of talking about it and debating about whether or not you should be gracious, it should be given out of love,
I like it.
period.
I like it.
And that's all I have to say about that.
Well, I'll give my take on it.
Okay.
And everything you said, was a lot of good information.
Thank you, baby.
Um, and I think forgiveness and grace is pretty much, if I could use this example, is the bread and peanut butter to an effective
You
marriage,
always got a
right?
food analogy.
I gotta have an analogy. Um, it's pretty much what holds the marriage together, right? Forgiveness
Mm-hmm.
and grace.
No.
And look, there will always be times or a time where arguments and disagreements may occur, right?
Absolutely.
Or even when your spouse will let you down. But
Many times for that. Many times for the letdown.
yeah, but we have to be willing to accept that our spouse is not perfect,
Yes.
and they will either make mistakes or do something to disappoint you. Now, I can only speak for myself, but most of the time it is unintentional.
Yeah.
And these mistakes can be short term or long term mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to take an opportunity to discuss what I've learned in our marriage, babe, when it
Okay.
comes to the difference between these two types of mistakes, both long term and short term,
All right.
as I believe the ability to forgive can differ between the two.
I agree.
So um, let's look at some short term mistakes if we could.
All right.
And I'm just going to name a few. I'm not going to go too much into detail. But one is reacting in anger.
Mm.
And like I said, I'm talking about some short term mistakes that we could make.
Okay.
So, reacting in anger, skipping important conversations, and this could be in the form of conflict avoidance,
Okay.
pretty much after an argument, right?
Yeah. That sounds about right.
Yeah, another one is neglecting to connect with each other daily.
Mm.
Now, I know some people may say, well, no, that's more long term. It's short term because normally we try to
Every.
do the weekend, right? We'll be
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I'm done with all this stuff. And, now we have the weekend to connect. But a lot of times you got to, we got to
We're
make sure we
married.
try to connect somehow daily, right?
Yes.
Because we go to work, we have things that happen while we're on the workplace or, with the kids. And so we have to find a way to connect with each other daily.
Yeah.
Another short term um, mistake is being distracted during conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
There could be something going on where, and I only could use this for the men, we may be, anxious to get to something else versus having this conversation. It's like, well, I got
Mm-hmm.
something else I could possibly do,
Okay.
right? And, that can, upset your spouse.
Yeah.
And then the last one I have here is rushing decision making,
Mm.
right? So what that means is
I was just about to ask, what does that mean?
making quick decisions
Mm-hmm.
without consulting each other can lead to regrets and feeling excluded,
Oh my goodness.
right?
That one,
Yeah.
that right there. That. Yes. That.
Oh Lord,
That.
stop it.
Yes.
And I can only speak for the men's, as the head and and the leader of our household,
Not the men's.
we tend to say, well, I'm making the right decision for our family, right?
Okay.
Um, but we fail to bring in our
Include.
spouse, in
Hello.
that decision making.
Right here. I'm right here.
So, and they have a say in it as well,
Yeah.
in my opinion, they do,
Yes.
So I feel like, rushing decisions and not including them could be a form of a short-term mistake, right?
Yeah.
And these examples that I gave often have an immediate emotional impact, and forgiveness has the opportunity to reign sooner than later if there's open communication in the marriage,
Yeah.
right?
I agree.
Yes. Um, and then grace comes in when we are able to respond with understanding rather than anger,
Mm.
expressing our feelings in the situation versus pointing the blame,
That's so important.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I talked about short term. Let's do long term mistakes if we could.
All right.
So some of the long term mistakes, and I got more than the short term. So let me go through these. So
Okay.
ignoring emotional needs.
Okay.
All right. That's one. Failing to grow together. Now, we talked about this on our last episode.
I feel like we talk about this a lot.
Growing together.
Yeah.
Yes, you got to be willing to grow together with your spouse because there's always going to be changes.
Mm-hmm.
Your spouse isn't going to be the same person they were when you first met. We get older, and I don't want to go into the details, but
Life changes.
yeah,
Life happens.
it just happens.
Mm-hmm.
So failing to grow the get to grow together is pretty much not adapting to changes in each other's lives,
Yeah. That's good.
right?
Yeah.
And then another one is holding grudges.
Mm.
Like that can be long term. Like if you hold grudges for, years and years to come, those things can build up,
Mm.
right?
Mm-mm.
And then another one is neglecting intimacy. Mm. And we talked about this last season.
Mm-hmm.
When you neglect intimacy, um, not allowing physical and emotional intimacy,
To
um,
dwindle.
it will
Yeah.
dwindle away and can create a rift in the relationship over time.
Yeah.
And my last two that I have, I think is going to be failing to discuss and align on life goals,
Mm-hmm.
right?
You're one. You should have aligning goals
Yes,
for your
aligning
life.
goals. And then becoming complacent.
Ooh.
Yeah, we have to be mindful of that. Those can be long term mistakes that we make. Um, and these these mistakes that I presented here,
Mm-hmm.
are examples. Um,
It can be deeply rooted
yeah,
issues. Yeah.
they can be.
Yeah.
And these can be ongoing, ongoing neglect or unresolved conflicts, right?
Yeah.
And these can lead to deeper emotional wounds that can complicate things.
Absolutely.
Now, some of what Kiana and I experienced in our first marriage is what I just gave you.
Yep.
You know,
For sure.
exactly. So I would call it emotional baggage from past issues,
Mm.
which can cloud our judgment and make being able to forgive our spouse more difficult.
Yeah.
Now, forgiving long term mistakes may require more time and a lot of effort on both sides of the marriage. Overall, while short term mistakes have the potential to be forgiven quicker, long term mistakes typically involve deeper complexities and may
Yeah.
require more of a commitment to healing and to change.
Absolutely. And I feel like there are certain things that do well over time,
Mm-hmm.
like, wine ages well over
Yes.
cheese.
Oh
But unresolved conflict
my
is not
goodness.
one of them. We
Yes.
have got to make sure we are being gracious and forgiving each other. So, I want to talk about two more elements of the foundations of love, you guys, and that's communication and unity.
Okay.
Okay. So, forgiving someone was something I never learned to do well, you guys.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say that. I didn't. And it's because forgiveness, and this is going to sound weird to some people, but forgiveness was not something I had to practice regularly. I just didn't. Like, I was never asked by anyone to be forgiven. Like, hey, Kiana, will you forgive me for that? Like,
Yeah.
I never was, no one ever presented that opportunity to me. So the concept was lost on me.
Mm.
Like when I was required to exercise forgiveness in marriage, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you mean? No. The way I handled forgiveness was to forget about it until I needed to remember it again.
Yep. And bring it up.
I think we call those holding grudges.
Holding grudges. Talked about that.
But I learned with God's help that forgiveness requires deep psychological work.
Yeah.
So remember, this means we must explore our mental, spiritual, and emotional self
Mm-hmm.
to repair that place in our soul, which requires a lot of time and work.
Okay.
So, some of you may know, I mentioned this last season that, I'm into fitness. So, in fitness,
Oh, nice. Another fitness example. I love it because you're always on point with it. Go ahead. I'm
thank
sorry.
you. So, in fitness, I always say showing up is half the battle, right? For me, this
Mm-hmm.
is like mental because
Yeah.
the workout is always mental before it's physical for me, because you sometimes you just don't want to do things, right? So the exercising starts in the brain, and by the way, I'm pointing at my head, you guys can't see that. It starts up here, and up here is in the mind, you guys. So again, like I said, in fitness, I always say that showing up is half the battle. And once I get there, I'm there. So
Yeah.
I might as well do something. Run, do some weightlifting, anything. So I'll use that same concept here. Once I showed up mentally to say I wanted to forgive, I was open to God for
Mm-hmm.
repair.
Okay.
So God helped me see that I could trust my husband and he would not hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to get comfortable with saying things like I felt sad when fill in the blank,
Uh-huh.
or I felt alone when fill in the blank.
Yeah.
All of these were, in my opinion, weak thoughts to me
Mm.
until I realized no matter what lie I told myself
Mm-hmm.
about how I was feeling, these were real emotions that I felt. And covering them up didn't make me stronger. They just did not. It made me less like God because I was being mean and angry all the time.
Yeah.
So, you guys know I'm always telling stories, and I can't help it because God has brought me through a lot, and I've grown so much. So, it's story time again.
Yay, story time. I love stories. Come
All
on.
right. So, God said something that shook me to my core. And caused me to make immediate changes in my life. I recall one of those like skin peeling moments when
Mm.
I was wrestling with God. I was lying on the couch in our office, and I vividly recall hearing God say something to me that just, you guys, it only took the one time, and I got it right.
Okay.
Here is what I heard God say. This is what the Holy Spirit said to me. You are going to die in this place. You're going to die like this. To which I replied, die like what?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where the like auditory conversation ended. And then I began to see like God gave me like images. And I saw what looked like a vision of myself on a battlefield, except I had the high ground. And anyone who knows a little about war knows the person with the high ground has the advantage. So I'm on a hill, right? In a position of like a sniper lying on my belly, looking out over the field, which is filled with landmines, mind you. And in the distance, I see my husband preparing to cross
Oh Lord.
the field,
Ah, I'm gonna
right?
die.
This is what God is showing me. Mind you, he does not know he is in or getting ready to come into a minefield,
But you know.
but I could see
Oh
it.
Lord.
So he sees me, right? Um, or I see him,
I got a visual. I'm sorry.
and
Go ahead.
he's walking and he's talking, coming towards me. But instead of me warning him of the mines and guiding him through the field,
Mm.
I wait for him to
Jesus.
step on a landmine, which he does and blows himself up.
Oh Lord.
And you guys, that's not it. As he blows himself up, I proceed to yell at him for not
Mm.
seeing the landmine, stepping
Mm.
on it,
Wow.
and blowing himself up. So I said, God, what are you saying? This is where I learned that in our marriage, I would let my husband do something wrong just to prove a point
Wow.
instead of helping him. I was prone to allowing him to fail when God created me, according to Genesis 2, to be his helper, his helpmate.
Yeah.
And of course, I said, I was doing no such thing. Like, God, I wasn't, that's not what I'm doing, God. But God showed me I was not fulfilling one of my duties as a wife. I saw my husband, in sports terms, as an opponent or
Mm.
someone who was not on my team. I was vengeful and arrogant. And this is where I would die
That yeah. Okay.
if
So
I didn't stop fighting against my husband and start fighting with him.
okay, that makes sense now. Okay,
Yes.
gotcha. You're gonna die in the way that you are and how you treat. Oh, okay.
Yes. So God
Wow.
wasn't talking about a physical death, you
Yes.
guys. It was this haughtiness I had in my heart. It was a soul thing
Mm-hmm.
because I wasn't allowing God to sanctify me in those places, right? So we are the bride of Christ, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for
We're
sure.
the bride of Christ. So I felt like God was saying, this is my last time telling you to stop this behavior. Talking to me, Keyona. Otherwise, I'll give you over to your adulterous heart. And if that doesn't make sense to you, what I'm saying is, as Christians, we no longer belong to ourselves. We were bought with a price, the blood of Christ. So we should be submitted to God in all areas of our life.
Mm-hmm.
He should reign and rule as our spiritual husband.
Mm-hmm.
So to go outside of my marriage to God to fulfill a need the way I want to fulfill it is adultery,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. So I am not being faithful to God in my heart
Mm-hmm.
because He is my God. Jesus Christ is my Lord. So
Mm-hmm.
He has control over my life. So how dare I go outside of what He requires of me to fulfill my flesh? And in which case, I am being an adulterous
Yeah.
wife,
Yes.
okay, or bride. So I'm cheating on God and not depending on Him to protect me and fulfill my needs because I'm depending on my own strength. Therefore, having an adulterous heart. Immediately I repented
Um,
and asked for help from God, to which He obliged. And even then, the road to being a team being a team with my husband was not easy,
mm-hmm.
but it became easier with communication. And I learned to stop depending on anger to protect me
Wow.
because I that's really what I was doing.
Yeah.
I had more confidence in anger than I did in God to protect me. And since then, I've also learned that no matter how many years we've been married, my husband cannot read my mind. So it's important that I share my feelings and thoughts with him. I communicate my emotions instead of assuming he knows he knows better because he doesn't. He's not a mind reader.
Yeah.
In this way, we're unified because we both understand what the other needs at the moment. We respect the need and we show each other grace by not jumping to a negative conclusion or an assumption.
Wow.
And I know that was a lot, you guys, on communication and unity, but I can't even tell you guys how much God has taught me about my own adulterous heart, okay, and my own sinful nature. I think is a more common term to use to explain this. But I have learned that communication and unity is a foundation of love.
Yeah, that was
Heavy.
yeah, that was heavy, and
Yeah.
I really hope the listeners grasp the example you gave, and
Was able to follow.
yeah, the
Yeah.
visuals, like really envision what she's saying. Like, wow, yeah,
Yeah.
that was good.
Thank you. It was hard
Um,
for me to hear and for God to show that to me,
yeah,
but it was necessary.
wow. Well, okay.
I know. Where do you go after that?
Where
It get
you go? So, my take on
communication and unity.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm lost
I
in.
know. I
Okay,
know.
so I would say, okay, what is unity?
Okay.
What is unity? The I don't even have the word. So, the state of being or joined as a whole.
Okay.
That's what unity is.
Okay.
And there are many scriptures in the Bible highlighting the importance of unity in a marriage. Now, just to name a few, we have Genesis chapter 2 verse 24. We have Ephesians chapter 5 31 through 33. And then there's Matthew chapter 19 verse 3 through 6.
Okay.
I would encourage our listeners to check the content of these scriptures in your spare time,
Okay.
and really look at them together as a couple.
Okay.
Um, Another question that comes to mind is, what is the opposite of unity? And these are how my thoughts go when I'm looking at a word, regardless of, how simple the word may be.
Okay.
So, what is the opposite of unity? And that is division.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So the English dictionary would define division as the action of separating something into parts or the process of being separated,
Okay.
right? So, like I said earlier, the Bible talks about unity in marriage, and then there's division
Mm-hmm.
where there's separation.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many obstacles we've dealt with as a married couple
Mm-hmm.
that have caused us to be divided,
Yes.
which my wife gave examples in her previous statement, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just want to give a high level overview of other challenges we've experienced that I believe would be valuable for this discussion.
Okay.
And I want to discuss the changes we've made by the guidance of the Holy Spirit to correct some of these obstacles, putting us back in a place of being united.
Okay.
So, of course, first and foremost, let's start with communication.
Right.
Um, Lack of clarity or misinterpretation of each other's words lead to conflict within.
Oh, that was always an issue for us.
Yes,
Yeah, that was always a conflict
it was
within
always
our
within our
discussion.
discussions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And we always got into arguments.
always led to arguments. I would also at times withhold my feelings or refuse to discuss issues just to avoid an argument.
Yep.
It was like, I do not want to go through this today. Um, let me just
Be
share what I
quiet.
want to share,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna keep it moving.
Conflict avoidance, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What we've done to correct this is to have regular, honest conversations about our feelings, thoughts, and concerns without fear of judgment. This is something I talk about all the time.
Yeah.
Allowing the ability, having the ability to allow your spouse to share their thoughts and feelings without you being judgmental towards them,
Yeah.
and allowing them to have a place of comfort to want to share.
Absolutely.
Um, we gave each other our undivided attention,
Yeah.
validating each other's experiences and emotions.
Yeah.
Now, this takes place during our marriage devotionals and our ESPN check-ins
Yes.
that
PM.
we've been, yeah, ESPN, what I said,
P.
oh, sorry, I'm thinking about football,
ESPM. Okay.
ESPN check-ins
Mm-hmm.
that we have been talking about since last season.
Yeah.
And we continue to talk about them today because we are continuing to be active in our devotionals and our ESPM check-ins,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
All right, so let's look at shared goals and values. This is
Okay.
something I talked about earlier. Kiana and I was raised different, so therefore came into our relationship with differing values, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were different family practices between social activities and different views on parenting.
Mm-hmm.
I I will also throw finance in the mix.
Okay.
We were able to realign and be on the same page with parenting according to the Bible.
Yes.
That was the combining factor of where we would stand in reference
The
to
common
our
ground.
values. Yes,
Yeah.
that was the common ground. That's what would bring us together and keep us together and have
Yeah.
that commonality. And then we were able to integrate each other's values and beliefs into our marriage.
Yeah.
All right. Another one is unresolved past issues, right? So we've covered this topic and we'll continue to cover it during our podcast, but unresolved feelings or conflicts from our past, whether it was from our first marriage or childhood experiences, these have caused division among us.
Yeah.
Past traumas that haven't been addressed resurfaced,
Mm-hmm.
which made the temptation to relive those feelings all over again.
Yeah.
And it was very overwhelming.
Yeah.
So now we are able to approach these past traumas, which, like I say, they did cause conflict, with a focus on understanding and resolving issues sooner than later.
Yeah.
It's kind of like preventive maintenance. You know, you always have to stay on top of the issues that are taking place. You can't let them, go days or weeks.
Yeah.
And then we just wanted to make sure that we were honest with how we feel and not leaving anything on the table.
Yeah. Or leaving anything off the
Well,
table.
anything
Yeah.
off the table,
Yeah.
yeah. So addressing these obstacles required Kiana and I to have open communication, empathy, and pretty much a willingness to work together as a team to find solutions that will move our relationship forward instead of backwards.
Yeah.
Now, unity in the marriage is about working together. I mean, it's that's what unity is as a cohesive team.
Yeah.
Creating that deep bond that allows both partners to thrive, not only collectively, but even in our individual, perspectives.
Absolutely. And if I could jump in here, you guys, and I know we've talked about, again, I knew this was going to be a heavy topic. We've
Yeah.
talked about a lot, but truly, communication is one of the keys to a healthy marriage if it's done
Correct.
properly.
Yes.
Yes. And might I remind everyone, if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, or if you are single listening to this, or engaged and you're feeling overwhelmed, I just want to remind everyone that marriage is a choice, right?
Yes.
So you can choose to marry or remain single. Like, God honors both.
Yes.
But if you choose marriage, know this,
Ooh. Yeah.
know this,
Man.
you are choosing a sacred and sacrificial call
Yes.
to another person and God.
Mm.
Marriage is holy, therefore important to God. It's
Yes.
sacred because God establishes marriage, and sacrificial in the sacredity of, or sacrecy of marriage,
Mm-hmm.
because you must die daily.
Daily. Yes.
Yes. It is a type of um like Christ-like dying
Mm-hmm.
that you experience in marriage. But don't marvel at, the use of the word die.
Mm-hmm.
All that means is that you are giving up part of your, like, self, like
Yes.
your mentality that separates you from
Whatever.
your spouse.
Exactly. Whatever pride you have, whatever
Yes.
greed.
Yes. The idea of marriage, you guys, is oneness in God.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have to become one. You're no longer two. You're
Mm-hmm.
one. Like, literally, you're one.
Exactly.
So when God was teaching me to die to part of myself, it was like taking off my skin.
Mm.
Painful, right?
Yeah.
Or like shattering my body into a million pieces without my body falling apart,
Wow.
so that he could shine his light inside me again. Again, painful but necessary at times for sanctification. The concept of peeling of my skin was essentially like the old Keyona
Mm-hmm.
fighting against the Holy Spirit. In other words, I knew what was right, but I didn't want to do it
Mm-hmm.
for various reasons, mostly because I didn't want to appear weak,
Yeah.
and well, I would say mostly, but I also had it was some other reasons. So the battle to submit to truth is what caused wars in my mind, which looked like an emotionally unstable woman in the natural.
Mm.
Okay, so one minute I was happy, then I was mad, then I wanted to be touched,
Okay.
then I didn't want to be touched. Confused the heck out of my
Yes,
husband,
it did. I'm like, what season are we in today? I don't know.
right?
You know.
Like, I don't know whether to approach this woman or not.
Yeah, you definitely had to have spiritual
Awareness.
awareness of your marriage and how your spouse is. So
Absolutely. So you will have to learn to die daily to selfishness, pride, lust, anger, lies, etc.,
hmm
to be available for the good works that God has for you as
yeah,
it relates to your marriage, and to serve your spouse and any other calling on your life.
yeah,
So there's something to be said for a servant leader. And I see like a beautiful image in my husband
hmm
as a servant leader, and seeing him spiritually bow to God and allow him to work out my sanctification instead of pointing out my faults
hmm
or making statements that would incite violence,
yeah.
or an argument, I should say, so that no one gets the wrong idea.
Hey, it's okay over here. I'm fine. Don't worry
Okay,
about it.
right. Blink twice if you need help,
Okay.
bruh. So there's nothing wrong, you guys. And I said servant leader and serving my husband.
hmm
So this may be triggering for someone. There is nothing wrong with serving your spouse.
Yeah.
If that word triggers you, it is because you probably have a perverted concept
hmm
of servitude.
Yeah.
And I implore you, I beg you to seek some counseling, either from God, fall, maybe fast, fall before God, seek a maybe a spiritual counselor, or a professional counselor.
Hmm.
um, because, like me, you might find pride is taking up residence in that space where humility should
Yeah.
live along with God.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Thank you, baby. So,
Yeah.
those are just a couple of tips that I wanted to throw out there as we prepare to wrap it up.
Okay.
All right. And as you all know, or you may know if you listen to episode one, we've started a new challenge
Hmm.
at the end of every episode. It's called Turning Mess into Beauty.
Yes.
Okay. So, babe, do you want to tell them like what we want them to do?
Yeah. So, and remember just the topic, communication and unity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the homework that we are going to give you all is we want you to consider one messy concept or
Mm-hmm.
topic we discussed that you and your spouse can transform into something beautiful this week.
Absolutely.
And like I say, if it like I said last week, if it takes longer than a week, that's fine. Make sure you notate that
Mm-hmm.
this is the messy challenge that we'll be working on. And just
Yes.
keep in mind we touched on communication and unity
Mm-hmm.
in this particular episode, and forgiveness and grace. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Forgiveness and grace, and forgiveness and grace, and communication and unity. So pick one. Don't feel overwhelmed.
Hmm.
I know we've discussed a lot. You guys take your time, okay, and take notes and pray together.
Yeah, and
And
do the work. Do the work.
please do the work. And we are getting ready to wrap this up, you guys. So thank you for joining us for another episode of It's
It's
a
a
Beautiful
beautiful
Mess.
mess.
Be sure to follow us on our social platforms for more content. We are everywhere, you guys: Facebook, IG, YouTube,
Ticks of the
TikTok,
talks.
Ticks of the Talks. We're everywhere. And remember to lead with love. Bye bye.
Have a good one.